There we go. Hopefully everybody can see the full screen there. Jamie, can you just confirm? Can you see the whole screen? Amazing. So, right, where do we go with this? It is so fast moving. It is so stressful for a lot of you, I can imagine. So we've tried to unpick it today, and as I say, cover some of the core themes that were coming through in your questions, which we are so grateful for. It's a brilliant way of running one of these sessions. As I said to a client yesterday, I'm not Mystic Meg. I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did somehow. The only thing I can say is, if you look at the way that the US is responding to President Trump's measures, nobody's really in favor of them. I don't see this with the rest of the world as being a long drawn out process. Obviously, there's something very different going on with China. Trump didn't like the way that China responded to his measures. So, as we probably predicted a little bit more in the know, we've been seeing a big trade war coming between the US and China the minute that Trump was voted in. It had already started with his last administration, so we figured it would pick up. But measures or changes to his measures that he announced yesterday, you can see that China remains his focus, and he is pausing some of his measures and relenting a little bit on some of those higher tariffs for the rest of the world. In recognition, he says that countries are reaching out looking to negotiate lower bilateral tariffs, and in which case he wants to put that 90-day pause on there. So I think we have to, remain calm. It's a bit painful, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to be a long drawn out process, potentially with China, which I recognise as a big impact on some of our e-commerce sellers that, for argument's sake, they buy goods in from China and then just simply ship them out to the US, and we'll talk about the impacts on that. But I hopefully don't see this as been a long drawn out process, fingers crossed. So by means of a brief agenda, what we've pulled together is just an update on what the measures are and what they mean. Obviously, it's a very fluid situation. It's changing all the time. You think you've got the latest, and then you get a news alert and you go in and investigate that, and there's been another change. So where are we currently? Hopefully Trump is asleep right now and he's not making any changes to what I put in the slides at 2 o'clock this morning. I want to talk about origin and declaring the origin of goods, because there's a lot of confusion around that. Obviously, there's no bilateral trade agreement with the US and the UK. So those standard rules of origin or specific rules of origin that we would locate within a trade agreement don't exist for the US. So what do we do in recognition of that? Then we'll talk about customs valuation of goods. So at what point is the tariff applied, and on what is it applied, so that you can start to think about the impact on your customers when the goods land in the US. So, how much is this going to inflate the landed cost of your goods? We'll talk about payment of duty, because we've had a lot of clients say, who pays the duty? Do I pay the duty? Does my customer pay the duty? That very much depends on the agreement that you have with your customers. So that's all around Incoterms. Some of you may have heard of them, some of you may not be that familiar with them. So we'll cover off those as well. And that really dictates who between the buyer and the seller pays those inflated duties. And then we'll talk about, wider considerations and what should we be doing now. And then, like I said, I'd like to maybe leave about 10 minutes for questions at the end, hopefully. So where we sit at the moment, we've got this 25% tariff on all aluminium, steel and certain derivative goods, which I'll give some examples of what those derivative goods are. So those of you that may be impacted can see that your products are in there and are subject to the higher 25% tariff, rather than what we're referring to as the baseline 10% tariff. So the baseline 10% tariff is what was celebrated in some corners of the UK week commencing, that first week in April, as being, oh, we've dodged a bullet. The EU has 20%, the UK has 10%. That's the baseline tariff. Trump has actually, with the exception of Canada, Mexico, China, and Hong Kong, pretty much now everybody is on that baseline 10% tariff, which I've got a slide that I'll show you. So we, as exporters of UK products going into, so UK origin products going into the US, irrespective of whether they're going to consumers or business customers, those goods will be subject to a 10% tariff on import into the US, which is quite a hike considering the US has had the lowest tariffs, globally for a long time. And then other products that are subject to the higher 25% tariff are those vehicles and light trucks and those automobile parts that are linked to those. That's not in currently, but will be in no later than, we're told, the 3rd of May. So you're looking at aluminium and steel, certain derivatives of those goods. You're looking at vehicles and light trucks, and then associated parts for those products are going to be subject to the higher tariff, and then everything else is at the baseline tariff. There's been a little bit of confusion about how the duty is calculated, and are these stacked tariffs, like, it's the 10% on top of what was the old tariff? No, it's a replacement. So if your goods are subject to a 3% tariff before these measures, then they're now just simply subject to the 10% baseline tariff. I think the confusions come from, as we've seen the US stack the measures on top of China. So they may have been subject to 20%, and then Trump stuck another 25%. That's proper trade measures, a proper kind of, ignition of a trade war. For you guys, that 10% baseline is what replaces your old duty. Obviously, as I say, all of these tariffs are imposed on goods irrespective of whether they're going to consumers or to businesses. There's no exemptions for small companies, which is, crazy given the fact that, it's always our micros and our SMEs that are disproportionately impacted by any kind of heavyweight regulation, any kind of, countermeasures in terms of duties and so on. But there is no exemption for small businesses. We've had questions. We have quite a big client base in the creative and art sector. So thank you guys for submitting your questions. Previously, in the past, antiques over 100 years of age are typically exempt from tariffs in the US, providing you can submit paperwork that kind of validates their age. We're not seeing anything that suggests that they are exempted under these new measures. So, and in fact, many products that were previously 0 rated as well now have that 10% baseline tariff attached. So we're not seeing anything from the Customs and Border Protection Agency to suggest that there's an exemption for antiques or works of art or anything like that. So apologies for that, everyone. But I think, again, where they're UK manufactured and they're just subject to that 10%, hopefully this is a short-lived measure. Looking at kind of like a quick snapshot, given Trump's change of heart yesterday, obviously he has a whole calculation that sits behind how he imposed some of these higher duties of 49%, 46% on Vietnam and so on. He has a whole calculation behind that, and some of those were really quite punitive and affected some 60 of America's closest trading partners. Now he's made the decision to replace those with a lower reciprocal tariff of 10%, because he said that these countries are reaching out to the US looking to negotiate, and that means that the EU that was going to be charged 20%, Vietnam that was looking at 46% have really dodged a bit of a bullet, and now they're on, at least for the next 90 days, that 10%. Now, what's interesting is that Trump has actually imposed tariffs on goods that on countries that actually have a free trade agreement with the US, which free trade is meant to be. There are no reciprocal tariffs, but for goods that are not explicitly listed in that free trade agreement, by default, they will face the baseline tariff. So, the US has a trade agreement with Korea and with Japan, and any goods that aren't explicitly listed in that tariff within the trade agreement are subject to this 10% baseline tariff. And similarly, some of you may be aware of general system of preferences. Those nations, those underdeveloped or emerging markets that World Trade Organization countries like the UK and the US, we agree to import their goods at a reduced or zero rate of duty in an effort to help boost their industrialization strategy, boost their exports. And that's kind of like what we call a unilateral trade agreement, where we import their goods at a zero rate of duty, but they import our goods with a duty attached. He's kind of applied this baseline duty to even those beneficiary nations, some of those, really, thank you, some of those, really quite impoverished countries. So we see the Philippines and Sri Lanka as well are subject to that 10% duty. So it's kind of like taking a sledgehammer to a problem, which we know is more Trump's modus operandi, if you like. I personally can see what he's trying to do. It's just the way that he's doing it is a bit disruptive. When I talked earlier about steel and aluminium products, they refer to derivative products as well. So that's those products that are made of aluminium and steel and that show in the US's analysis of their imports over several years as being those, frequently imported goods. So for Trump, they represent those ones where, the US market has been flooded with overseas product that in his eyes is imported very cheaply into the US. But if the US was to export those products to those other countries, they're facing trade barriers in the form of higher tariffs. So there's quite a number of these derivative products. Like I say, there's some 187 tariff codes for steel and 123 tariff codes for aluminium products that are impacted. So in the automotive and industrial component sector, I've given a list there just for your benefit. NESOI is oh God, it's completely gone. Not elsewhere specified or indicated. It's just one of our acronyms. So I've given a list there of those products that fall within that. It's not an exhaustive list, and I've provided a link in another page for where you can find the full list should you need to go and take a look at your particular products. Furniture and kitchenware is also going to be impacted. So again, I've given the list of products here, kind of like the top 5, if you like. So it's furniture, it's household articles, cookware, kitchenware, door hardware. There's a lot in there. So that's where you could potentially be facing the 25% rate rather than the 10% rate on these derivative products. And then the final one I just wanted to show you is the sports and recreational equipment. This is probably the greatest list of products that are going to be subject to that 25% tariff rather than the 10% tariff. But here, and you will get a copy of these slides together with a copy of the recording, you can click to find the full list of products that are very likely going to be subject to the 25% rate of duty rather than the 10% rate of duty because they're aluminium or steel derivative products. So hopefully that explains that. Now, a big part of some of your questions was around country of origin, because origin dictates, well, origin and the nature of the goods dictates what tariff they face in the import country. Some of you recognize that country of origin is not always the country of export, but just to be clear, it's the country of origin where the goods are either wholly obtained or substantially transformed. And I'm going to break through what that means. It's the country of origin that dictates which tariff is applied. So not the country of export. So in a scenario here, I would say that where we're making UK origin goods, and we can prove through the rules of origin that I'm going to talk through that they are UK origin, then they will be imported into the US at the 10% baseline rate of duty. If, however, we haven't done anything in the UK to change the origin of Chinese goods that we've brought into the UK to subsequently sell to the US, we haven't substantially transformed them to change the origin from Chinese to UK, then they keep that nationality, they keep that Chinese country of origin. Even though they're being exported from the UK into the US, not from China into the US, they will face a 25% duty. So irrespective of whether Chinese origin goods are shipped direct from China into the US or via the UK into the US, they will face that higher rate of duty, which I think, if I went back a couple of slides, it's a little bit ridiculous, isn't it? It's what we were at last night, 145%, which is just crazy. So it's the origin of the product, not necessarily the country that they're being exported from, that determines what duty is paid in the US. Now, there is currently no UK-US bilateral preferential trade agreements. There's no free trade agreement that says that, the US will import UK goods at a zero rate of duty and the UK will import US goods at a zero rate of duty. Now, this doesn't, the kind of negotiation of a trade agreement can take several years. The UK and the US doesn't need to have necessarily a trade agreement to lower the rate of tariffs on each other. You see, Trump has done it there. It's just imposed a 10% blanket tariff on UK products. But what the UK government has to do now, if it wants to negotiate with Trump, not necessarily, it could be pending a much bigger trade agreement, but they have to protect our own sectors. So they wouldn't want to say to the US, we'll zero rate US imports on everything, because we have sensitive sectors around our agriculture, around our agri-food, around those kind of sectors that are really important to the UK economy. We wouldn't necessarily want to have US product flood those sectors, because we need to protect our own home sector. So there's a lot of thought that must be going through the government's mind right now, in terms of if it approaches Trump and says, okay, we'll lower our tariffs, they're probably going to have to say, we'll only lower them on these kind of goods, because tariffs are a way of protecting your own domestic market, and it would be negligent of the UK government to just say, okay, we'll zero rate everything, because that would place our own sectors in jeopardy, if you like. So we don't have a bilateral trade agreement, but the US and the UK are one of 166 World Trade Organization members. So where there isn't a preferential trade agreement, WTO members default to WTO rules. And that particularly is where the EU refers to anybody that it doesn't have a trade agreement with, and we do the same in the UK, we follow over. So you'll hear the UK say, or the EU say, if we don't have a free trade agreement with a country, we default to what we call most favoured nation rules. Now, the US doesn't refer to them as that. I'm trying to think what the US refers to them as. It's normal trade something, NTS, I think it is. But anyway, they default to what they've agreed to do with the WTO. Now, rather unhelpfully, the Customs and Border Protection and the CBP, which is the agency that's responsible for determining country of origin, and that's the agency that would be anything that was pulled by customs that customs weren't sure about, would refer it to this agency to say, is the origin declared correctly here? They refer a lot to court decisions, their own regulations, and their own interpretation of WTO rules to determine whether a product imported into the US has met the rules of origin, or the RU, as we like to call it. So the US applies the non-preferential rules of origin to goods coming into the US to check, sanity check that, you know, they're declared correctly. What do they do in these circumstances? So they adopt two key criteria, and I've given examples of these to break them down, so it's a little bit overwhelming. They look at whether the product that's been imported has been wholly obtained in the market where it's said to originate. So that's kind of like goods that are wholly grown or product that's manufactured in one particular country, you know, that country where the origin's declared. That's known as being wholly obtained. And again, I've got some examples here. So they'd look at that. That's a very straightforward decision on origin, and you know, it would be very easy for the UK producer to be able to say, yes, these products are of UK origin in that circumstance. But as we know, our markets are we're such a global economy. You know, we import goods, we manufacture them, we send them off for finishing, we bring them back, we do more to them. That's the nature of how we trade these days. So there has to be allowances in the rules of origin for that as well. And that's why we come to substantially transformed principle. Now, if there was a free trade agreement, there would be specific rules of origin against each individual product in the tariff that would dictate how much non-originating material could go into that product, how much extra value had to be added to that product, whether there had to be a change of tariff heading for the finished goods. It's a lot more complicated to navigate with a preferential trade agreement, because naturally you're looking to get a benefit, i.e. have your products imported zero rated. So there's a little bit more scrutiny, and also you know, you have to be able to demonstrate that origin and maintain those records for some 4 years. With non-preferential rules of origin, it's typically that substantially transformed principle is typically where the last major processing took place to those goods. But also there is this little caveat that says some goods might not have been substantially transformed. So we have to remember that substantially bit, and making sure that it doesn't fall into something that might be looked as too little processing, you know, where that rule of origin hasn't been met. We'll go through all this because I've got slides that bring it together. Providing proof of origin, where you want to declare that your goods are of UK origin. Some countries, even though there isn't a trade agreement, they'll insist on a certificate of origin. We see this where there are sanctions in place, or where certain governments don't want to let in products from others. So we'd see, for example, exports from the UK to the Arab League of Nations will often have to be accompanied by a British Arab certificate of origin to say that they're UK origin goods, because the Arab nations don't want to import goods from, say, Israel. So they want to have, even though there's no benefit in terms of zero rate of duty when those goods are imported into those Arab nations, they still want to know for, you know, legally what is the origin of these goods, because they want to prevent goods from certain countries making their way into their markets. We've not been given anything from the CBP to suggest that the way you declare origin has changed from before. So we're not being asked at this point for any certificates of origin. So if you're putting on, obviously you've got your official paperwork for customs processes, which are typically your customs invoice, and also your packing list, which is where you would normally put the origin. You might say origin United Kingdom, or origin China. We're not seeing anything to suggest that that isn't still sufficient, if you like. But I would still say that this move and being able to circumnavigate what could be 145% tariff, products are going to probably be subjected to more scrutiny on import into the US to make sure that people aren't trying to circumnavigate that inflated tariff. There are some circumstances where proof of origin is not, you know, on the commercial invoice or on the packing list isn't sufficient. That we see on just certain products. So the North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada and Mexico came up with some marking rules, the NAFTA marking rules, and they're actually applicable to some non-preferential products as well. They're mainly things like greeting cards, rice preparations, some textile and apparel products, where every single article of foreign origin entering the US has to be legibly marked or labelled with the English name of the originating country. So that's just for certain products. We've also had a client that has brought something to our attention. I love it when everybody kind of, it's very much like bilateral, as I say. Some days, you know, you guys are informing me of things that you have heard of change. I'll go away and investigate. It's fantastic, this little community that we're building. We're so grateful for those insights, because we can't be on top of absolutely everything when it's moving this fast. So one of our clients, good morning, Tony and team, if you're on the call, alerted us to this need for manufacturer identification codes. Initially, we thought this might be linked to these trade measures, but actually it's not. It's something that was brought in back last year for textiles products going into the US. We're being asked now to produce manufacturer identification codes instead of the long-winded manufacturer information. So to give an example, I've used us as an example. You would create your own manufacturer identification code using the ISO code for the country of origin, or sorry, the country where the manufacturer exists, so GB, followed by the first three letters of the manufacturer's name, so GLO, followed by the highest digit of the address, so we're 1 Kingston House, so number 1, and then the first three letters of the city, which is Swindon. So that's just for textiles going into the US at this point. We'll keep you posted if the sectors become different. That's separate to these trade measures that Trump's brought in. This is something that was brought in, I think, August or October last year. But it's just, in case you asked for it, that's how you formulate those addresses or those identification codes. So the examples I wanted to bring through, so just to kind of put some examples behind those rules of origin. As we discussed, there's two different rules of origin principle. There's the wholly obtained, and then there's the sufficiently transformed. So these examples here I've given you are products that would easily be declared as UK origin as being wholly obtained. So it's kind of like plants and plant products, fruits and vegetables that have been grown and harvested in the UK are certainly of UK origin. That's very straightforward. Goods obtained from animals that live in the UK, like eggs, dairy products, they are wholly obtained and therefore UK origin. Any minerals or substances extracted, taken from soil or seabed or anything like that from within the UK or UK waters, they are UK origin. Live animals obviously born and raised in the UK are UK origin. And any goods that are obtained by hunting, trapping, fishing, again in UK waters, or farming, apiculture, aquaculture, anything that is conducted in the UK is of UK origin. And then similarly to the live animals born and raised in the UK, goods that are derived from those animals after slaughter are classed as UK origin as well. So that's a very straightforward one. We can easily get our heads around that. Where it gets a little bit complicated is non-preferential rules of origin. And I love this example. I've been using it for years. So sufficiently transformed. If we imagine I'm a UK manufacturer, I make suitcases or I make, travel bags or so on. I buy my leather from India. I buy my zips from China, and I buy my metal fasteners or buckles from Taiwan. But the process of completely transforming those component parts into a finished product that has an entirely different chapter heading or tariff heading in the tariff. So you can see my leather starts with 41, my zip starts with 96, my fastener starts with 83, but my finished suitcase starts with 42. That is a clear example of how the processing or the manufacturing undertaken in the UK has sufficiently transformed those products into a finished product that is completely different. So all of that processing done in the UK manufacturer can be confident that they have sufficiently transformed that product and they can declare correctly that it is of UK origin. Now, the next example I want to give you on sufficiently transformed is where the transformation that's undertaken in the UK might not be sufficient. And quite often it's around things like sometimes assembly, because it's too simple, things like cutting. The examples here are giving cutting or grating cheese, shelling and freezing of nuts. So if we're buying in EU origin cheese in the UK and we're just simply grating it and packaging it in the UK, when it's exported to the US, it probably hasn't changed its origin from EU to UK. So if the EU was still, facing 20% tariffs as opposed to 10%, that would be an example whereby our customers in the US would be paying the UK and the EU inflated tariff rather than our baseline 10% tariff. Actually, now for the next 90 days, we're all on 10%, so it makes very little difference. Similarly, the second example is around the nuts. So we've shelled them and we've frozen them, but we haven't sufficiently transformed them. They're still fundamentally nuts. So therefore, within the tariff, their tariff code probably isn't substantially different. So we haven't performed sufficient transformation or processing or manufacturing in the UK to be able to say, okay, that product's no longer EU origin, it's now UK origin. Okay, so hopefully that explains it a little bit more. Origin is complex at the best of times. So once we've declared the origin of our goods, what do customers actually do? There's been a little bit confusion amongst some of you around what the tariff is based on, what elements we bring into that customs value. So again, defaulting to the WTO, which so many of us abide by, even though we've got preferential trade agreements with nations, we still very much use the WTO's framework and the World Customs Organization framework. They're all these kind of like global bodies that we all subscribe to when we're members. So the WTO has an agreement on customs valuation that basically makes sure that every customs authority around those member countries is valuating the goods in the same way. So everything's transparent, everything's clear, duties are paid. There's no, everybody knows how it's done. It's kind of very, very, very standardized. There are 6 methods of customs valuation that are available via the WTO. Method 1 is referred to as the transaction value, and that is used by 90% of global trade. So 90% of consignments that are imported across those WTO nations will use that transaction value. And that sees us add a number of different things to simply the cost of the goods themselves so we build up that customs value by adding lots of different things together, and then the duty is applied on that. So we're asked to look at the what is due, the total payment that's due for those goods. So that would be based on if the customer had made any prepayments or annual payments. It's not just what they pay for the product at the point of export. If there's been any down payment or anything like that and they've already paid, that has to go into the customs value. And it must, that value, the value apportioned to the goods, must be the value that resulted in the goods being exported. So we've had a few of you say, and it's not that you're trying to be deliberately fraudulent, you're just trying to continue running your business and not lose your US customers. I totally appreciate that. But some people have said, can I sell the goods at the cost price rather than at the retail price? Well, no, because if you're selling to the consumer in the US, that will be at the market price unless you substantially discount it and claim it's a discount. because that sale to the consumer is what caused those goods to be exported. Now, if you were selling to a distributor, obviously you would sell at the distributor price because it was the distributor that ordered the goods, and that's what resulted in the goods being exported. And you'd have a distributor price, which is typically lower than your retail price. But you have to, for customs valuation purposes, you have to declare the value of the goods that resulted in the export of those goods. And really to try and circumnavigate that, it could be deemed to be fraud. And in which case, we face fiscal and sometimes custodial penalties for that. So that's not to be alarmist, it's just to make sure that, you are compliant, because so often things are picked up where it's just been a genuine mistake, but it can look worse. So you mustn't mask the price of the goods. So you have the value of the goods that resulted in them being exported. And then you'd add anything to that, like delivery charges, so the cost of transport, insurance, any loading and handling, any kind of packaging. Obviously, things like containers, they're reusable, pallets, they're reusable. There's ways of discounting those. Any kind of selling commission to agents, any kind of free of charge or what we call reduced charge goods. That might be any tooling charges or anything like that that's wrapped up in the manufacturing of the product and has contributed towards the selling price of the product, but isn't necessarily in the product price, has to be added. It has to be added to come up with the customs value. And then I've given an example on the right-hand side of how customs would value the goods. So you declare the customs value of the goods, having taken into account any prepayments, agents, commission, tooling charges, anything like that. That I've missed a zero off that. That should have been 20,000 for the goods. Then you add your freight. So I've said nominal figure of $750, and then your insurance $250. That gives you the CIF value, the customs insurance freight value, which is the value that the duty is calculated on. And then assume that the UK has a third country duty rate of 10%. That equates to $2,100 duty. So the landed cost of the goods is $3,100 more than the actual cost of the goods originally. That is a standard customs valuation using method 1, the transaction value. Now, groupage and mixed consignments. So goods on an export or import declaration are described as items, and items can be grouped according to where they originate from, so their rules of where their country of origin, or what they are, their commodity code, or by what process they're going into, so by their CPC code. It would be in a standard formal customs declaration. It should be easy for a clearance agent in the US to be able to identify what items within that groupage load were from China, say, which ones were from the UK, and therefore apportion the correct duty to those. Where it can sometimes be a little bit difficult is with postal, so B2C or e-commerce goods. If it isn't instantly easy for customs to determine which products in that consignment are from which origin, they will default to the highest rate. So we must make sure on our B2C goods, if we have any Chinese components in with that consignment to the consumer, then it's clearly stated what's of Chinese origin and that the rest is of UK origin. Otherwise, by default, customs will just apply the Chinese rate to everything, which would be horrific. It's normal trade relations. Sorry, yes, that's what the US calls its most favoured nation tariff. So the US applies this normal trade relations tariff to any goods that aren't covered by a free trade agreement. Now, the de minimis exemption rule, this has had a lot of you a little bit confused at the moment. So the US has a very high de minimis threshold. Some would say almost too generous when you compare it to the UK's at £135 and the EU's at 150 euros. The US allows $800 worth of goods per person per day into the US duty free, which is crazy. Um, they are, as I understand it, removing that from Chinese and Chinese origin goods and those originating from Hong Kong from the 2nd of May. So where you're simply box shifting goods from China or Hong Kong via the UK into the US, you're going to be hit by those charges. These are typically going to impact our e-commerce companies. Now, Trump actually increased the tariff that's going to be faced by those products to either 120% of their value or 100% or $100 per item, and that will increase to $200 per item from the 1st of June. So as I say, this is rapidly moving. This was just announced, I think, our time, 11 o'clock last night, something like that. So I don't know whether Mike, my dinosaur Mike, is on the call, but Mike, I don't know whether you wanted to, you felt you had some updated information on the de minimis. If you wanted to unmute yourself and share that with us, that would be amazing. I don't know whether you've made the call. No, maybe not. We can come back maybe if Mike's on a call. Mike thought he had some up-to-date information to share, so I'll follow up with him afterwards if he's not on the call this morning. And I'll pardon?
Surname. Yeah.
Watley, I think. And we can share that with you. And then finally, just really is the bit about who pays the duties, and this is very much down to your Incoterms, so what you have agreed with the customer in the US. Quite often, the two most common ones that are used for the US market are delivered at place or deliver duty paid. So delivered at place means that you, as the seller or the exporter, has agreed to pay all of the transportation charges to get the product to your customer's address or to an agreed named place, but the customer in the US is responsible for making the import declaration and paying any duties and taxes. The other one that we see used is deliver duty paid, which is where you as the UK exporter are responsible for pretty much everything. All the US customer does is take delivery of the goods. You declare them in the US and you are responsible for any duties and taxes payable. So that's what determines whether it's you, the exporter, or whether it's your US customer that's going to be paying these inflated duties. Hopefully that clarifies that. And then finally, I think, again, I don't have a crystal ball. I think we're going to almost definitely, it's fast moving. We're almost definitely going to see some impact on trade prices as those of us that are facing higher tariffs and just generally stresses on the supply chain and so on are going to try and offset some of those extra costs. So we are going to see some increases in trade prices. Something that the UK government needs to monitor really, really closely is that the UK market doesn't get flooded with product that countries unable to sell into the US start focusing on the UK, and that's what we call dumping of product. And the UK has a measure at its disposal called anti-dumping duty, which is an additional duty that we can place on top of the import duty. We've seen it, we've enacted it a few times in the past. There was a situation whereby China was dumping very cheap silk on the UK market some years back, and the UK imposed a 35% anti-dumping duty on top of the standard silk duty. So there are measures at our disposal, but we've got to be really, really vigilant, because that will further impact our home economy and make it more difficult for our own businesses to compete if there's a lot of cheaper product flooding the market that was destined for the US, but now those export countries are focusing on the UK to get rid of it. We may see exchange rate fluctuations impacting the US dollar. So, where we've got US dollar accounts where we're being invoiced in US dollars, all that kind of stuff, we could be subject to those exchange rate fluctuations. We've seen the market in the US respond a bit like this in response to Trump's measures. Obviously, we're not out of the water with regard to reciprocal tariffs. I know the UK government has been more level-headed than I expected it to be, and they haven't acted too rashly. But we've seen China start, and you can see how it's kind of, I always think makes me think of like when we were kids and we played that one potato, two potato, three potato, four. This is what's happening between the US and China at the minute. The US does something that China does it, then the US does it, and then before you know it, we're at 145% tariff on Chinese imported goods in the US. It's just a nonsense. So I'm quite pleased at the way the UK government has managed itself to this point, but it must be furiously working in the background to try and work out where to go next. We foresaw this another trade war with China and the US. Trump had just gotten into it with his last administration. We knew it was going to go this way, maybe not so soon into this administration. We've been banging on at clients for years now to start reducing their reliance on China for our manufactured goods. There are so many other countries that are chomping at the heels of China to establish themselves as global manufacturing hubs, Vietnam, India and others, and they typically have lower salary costs. They have improved the quality of their goods over recent years. They're good alternatives to China. China is probably on a par with Eastern Europe in terms of salaries now. So actually sourcing goods from China is not always as cost effective as it used to be. And we just have to build resilience into our supply chain, maybe reduce our reliance on China by sourcing goods from elsewhere and having a mixed bag, not placing all of our eggs in one basket. And this is another example where that becomes more and more important. And then finally, let's just be open and transparent with our customers in the US, both our consumers and our business customers. They're feeling the pain of this. Ultimately, this is making their life difficult. Their products are more expensive to source. However Trump, may portray it, fundamentally, the US is paying more for goods that it imports from overseas. So it's painful for them. So the more upfront and transparent we can be about our costs and so on, and just make it as easy to trade with us as possible while this issue is resolved. And then finally, the only other 2 points I wanted to mention was our 2 upcoming webinars. One on Wednesday next week about eco design for sustainable products regulation in the EU, which is now in force but doesn't come in with a hard implementation till the end of this year, beginning of next. So we've got some time. And then the packaging waste regulation, that's a biggie, which was actually rescheduled from the end of March, the end of March, I think it was, to the 30th of April. So they're coming in, so you can grab a coffee and sit down and hear what we've got to say about those 2 pieces of regulation. But on that, I've gone way over time. I'm gonna.
So we've got a lot of questions in the chat, and some of them are uber detailed around the composition of aluminium products. What I've said in the chat was, I think Andrew's answered a lot of the questions, particularly on things around VAT and how the calculations of these are done. What I'm going to ask is, anyone that feels that question hasn't been asked, please raise your hand. We'll go to Matt in just a second, but we do have to draw your attention that there's only so much we can answer in this call. As I say, there are some very detailed questions around the composition of aluminium that we're just not able to answer in a global forum. So remember, there's contact@globaltradedebt.com if you have any further details that you'd like help from us. But Matt, do you want to try and unmute, and we'll see if we can answer your question?
Yeah, mine's around, and I saw a couple of people also wanted to know this. It's around fulfillment centers. So if I've got a lot of product that I send into the US to a fulfillment center, or even my own warehouse if I have to do that, what's the tariff on? Because at that point, of course, there's no sale. So it's just so that it can get fulfilled out of there once the sales come in. So is the tariff then on my cost of my goods rather than the sales price?
So, have you got any so the not what would you normally do, Matt? Would you sell them into the fulfillment center at a cost price?
Uh, no, I mean we literally this would we could we floor the stock for them fulfill? So they just do they might charge us some storage or some pick and pack operation, but we're effectively moving it from ourselves into the US. At the minute, we just ship it in,
Yeah,
um,
I think I
and they
think that
fulfill
could
it.
I think that could be seen if you had a US entity and that US entity was obviously affiliated with you, you could get away with selling on a kind of transaction, a company, an intercompany transaction cost. You could do
Right.
it that way, and then you would obviously make a local sale from that US entity to
Yeah.
the customer in the US, and that would be accounted for in taxes that maybe, well, duty that hadn't maybe been paid on import would be recognised through corporation tax and other things on the profit of the company in the US. I think if you were to do it where there isn't a US entity there, I think it could be seen as trying to circumnavigate the duty. It could potentially be viewed as fraud.
Right. Okay.
So it would be really the price at which you sell, the price at which it is going to be sold to the consumer or the business customer when it's in the US. That's really what should be declared at customs.
Yeah. And someone's just said that same thing about Amazon, because of course you can dump into Amazon fulfillment centers for Amazon to fulfill for you. So it's the same thing, isn't it?
Um, no, I think it works slightly differently with Amazon, to be honest, as an online marketplace. I think they've got systems in place for kind of managing that whole thing. I mean, I can double check for you. My
Okay.
immediate thought is no, it should be sold in at the market value of the goods. But I can take it away as a question, especially since so many of you are looking at the same thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Not a problem. Okay. Hannah.
Oh, hello.
That,
I just wanted to ask, you talked about the 124% tariff versus the $100 per item and then $200 per item from the 2nd of June. How do we know which category our product will fall into? Is it one or the other? How do they work that out? Do you know?
for the de minimis threshold.
Yeah, so you mentioned that from after the de minimis threshold, so from the 2nd of May, the goods of origin from China were 124% or $100 and then $200 per item.
Yeah. So
So
they're
how
treated
do we...
different. So the de minimis threshold is usually for those smaller consignments that are often, e-commerce falls into that kind of session. So it'd be stuff that goes via the postal network that would be subject to those de minimis tariffs. But then say palletized goods or larger shipment of goods would be subject to that 145%. Because they're treated not through the postal network.
Oh, I see. Okay, so if you are sending goods to the end user in America, it would be $100 per item, and if you were sending a pallet to your distributor, it would be 124%.
Or 145%, I think.
145%, yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's fine.
No worries, no worries. David, good morning, David.
Hi, good morning. I just want to clarify the stacking tariffs question on a particular issue. So you've got a part that's UK origin, so that's 10%, but it's made of steel, so that's 25%, but it's also a car part, which is another 25%. So you're only paying 25%, or you're paying 25 plus 25 plus 10?
No, 25%.
Right, great.
So if so,
Okay.
is it so you so is the finished product that you've got,
Yes.
and you're just yeah.
Yeah.
So you work out obviously the origin of the finished product, which is presumably UK origin, but it's still subject to 25%. But
Yeah.
irrespective if it's fundamentally a steel product, the finished
Yeah.
product, then it would be subject to the flat 25%. So there's no stacking. There's no stacking of duty.
Wonderful. Just wanted that confirmed because we've been sweating a little bit for the past week just trying to get that confirmed.
Oh, that would be horrific, wouldn't it? I mean, you'd be up towards the 100%. No,
It'll be the same as having a goods of origin China. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's 25% for UK origin goods, but obviously if they're Chinese origin goods, then you're facing the higher tariff.
Yeah, that's fine. I understand that completely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome, David. You're welcome.
Thank you.
We are over time, but are you?
Well, I'm happy to continue if other people. I mean, please feel free to go if you need to. This is being recorded, so everybody will get a copy. But I'm happy to go for another couple of minutes.
So it's Angela. I'm afraid I can't the name.
Angela, good morning.
Hi, still just a little bit confused around the de minimis, and just wanted to confirm that it remains at $800 for UK origin goods.
For UK origin goods at the moment, yeah.
So does that change on 2nd of May? Someone said that changes, or is that just for China?
That's just for China. Obviously, it's a fast-moving thing.
Yeah.
So if we're notified that it applies to UK origin goods, then we'll notify everybody that's attended on this call.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you.
Phil?
Who's come off camera? Is it on camera?
Yep, it's me.
Morning,
Can you hear
Phil.
me okay? Hi,
Yeah.
right, I'm hearing on the grapevine with all my other associates that books are exempt from any tariffs. So I just want to get that clarified. The books are just general books. The code's 490-199-0000. And so I just want to clarify, will books now be subjected to the 10%?
As I believe it, yes, there are some very, very small exemptions around leaflets and things like that, but books, I think I haven't seen those exempt at all. So my understanding is they'd be subjected to the baseline 10%.
Right, so that would be only things that we're importing into America that's on a pallet. So if I'm sending them through Royal Mail parcels, that's not going to be subjected up to the 800 if the items of origin are in from the UK. Is that correct?
At the moment, yes. So we haven't had the de minimis threshold lowered for UK origin goods yet.
Okay, and what about European origin goods? So some of these books are printed in Europe, but they come to me and then I send them to America.
So that should be exactly the same as the UK, because the only lowering of the de minimis threshold at the moment is for Chinese or Hong Kong origin goods. Okay. Until that changes, UK or EU or any other country can use that de minimis threshold.
Okay, so as long as I stick below the de minimis threshold, I'll be fine. Well, my customers will be happy. All right, thank you.
No worries,
All right,
Phil, no worries.
Michelle.
Michelle, good morning.
In the queue still.
Hello.
Hi.
Two very quick questions, if I may. The first one based around the wholly obtained and sufficiently transformed rule.
Yeah.
So if I was to purchase, say, 10 components from one Chinese supplier and assemble all of those components in the UK, am I wholly obtained, or am I not wholly obtained, obviously? Am I sufficiently transformed, or am I breaking the rules?
Quite often assembled is classed as simple transformation and isn't sufficient to meet a rule of origin. I'm happy if you, I'm trying to think because we're just so busy at the moment. Normally I would say submit a question and we'll get back to you. Just drop us a line at contact@Global Trade Department and I'll look at it. I'll just double check in the WTO rules or whether there's any case law for the US that that refers to assembly and whether that's sufficient transformation.
Brilliant, thank you. And my
No
last
worries
one,
at all. Oh yeah, sorry.
just to clarify on the country of origin, when we're shipping from the UK to the US, if we've got 2 items in that package that were made in the UK and 2 items that were made in China, we would be subject to the Chinese tariff. Is that correct?
Only if it's not really clear. If customs have to spend too much time trying to work it out,
okay,
they will immediately just apply the highest tariff. So we just need to be belts and braces around how we show what the origin of the goods are. So be clear about the descriptions, double check your commodity codes, and declare the origin correctly. So long as they can instantly see it, they'll treat it correctly.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
Sean Davis.
Sean, good morning.
Hi,
Good
morning.
afternoon, actually.
Well,
Sorry.
yeah, we've tipped over, haven't we? Yeah, a quick question, which I think should be simple enough. So we manufacture steel machinery for filling bags, etc. We've got a project going to America quite soon. Because it's of steel manufacture, does it hit the 25% threshold, or because it's machinery, is it a 10% threshold?
I have a feeling it would be the higher threshold,
Okay.
because it's steel. But in the slides that will circulate, I've given the link to the full data that the US used to come up with these tariffs. So you may be able to locate your commodity code in that list of data, and it would tell you.
Okay,
Yeah?
no, that's good. Yeah, that'd be
No
a fun
worries.
conversation with the customer.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And you'll all be pleased to see Andrea's face moving now, because she doesn't realise she's been frozen for the last 45 minutes. Anthony David. Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. I have another question about the de minimis, if I may. We ship goods to the USA, and within that shipment, we'll have a mix of products from different countries of origin. So, for example, if we were to send a shipment worth $500 and 30% of the goods were made in China, 30% made in the UK, and 30% made in India, will they apply the de minimis? Will they say, because some of the products are made in China, we apply the new rules? And if so, is the tariff just payable on the Chinese goods or on all of the goods? Do you know exactly how it will be applied?
I think it's so fluid and it's so new. I can't say definitively. I have a feeling that those Chinese goods would be treated differently and would be stripped out of the de minimis, but I'm not entirely sure. So let me take that one away and see if I can get any more clarification on that one, Anthony, because I don't want to say something that's incorrect.
Oh, appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries.
Virginia?
Virginia, are you there?
I am here. Hi. I've just got a question about digital goods, on whether the tariffs apply to those and how would that work in practice?
Oh, so I'd have to take that one away, Virginia, and double check. I'll make a note of that one. Yeah, I'll make a note of that one. And then we'll just circulate. There might be others that are impacted by that. So I'll make a quick note of it and we'll circulate the answer with the slides of what I believe the answer is.
All right, thank you.
No worries, thanks.
Matt, but I think we already had Matt once before.
Well, we can go again. Matt, do you still have a question?
Yeah, you did. Sorry.
That's all right.
But actually, same question as a couple of other people, and it's on the mix. Mixed within an order, some Chinese goods, some non-Chinese goods. How's that calculated for de minimis or otherwise? And there was also some. I can't remember the question now. Someone about 5-6 questions back, and you said email in, and you'll figure it out. I needed to know the same answer. If you could add me to that, whatever that is.
Amazing. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that kind of like all of the answers are circulated so you can pick out the ones that apply to you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Amazing. No worries.
Richard Lewis.
Richard, good afternoon.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
Yeah, so we have a special agreement with the European truck manufacturers that they supply us with chassis without an engine or a gearbox. We then design and install an electric drive system. We've got some contracts coming up in America. Now, about a third of our purchase value are Chinese batteries, unfortunately. What do you think? Do you think we've got EU origin claim on that?
I would imagine so. I would imagine so. I can send you to be really belts and braces about it. What we do for preferential trade is we do an origin calculation where you break down the component parts of the finished product, and you allocate the percentage that they make of the finished goods and the value that they make up at the finished goods. You can do that calculation, and I would say, providing, you know, let's just say we apply the kind of the X works value and the non-originating material rule to it, providing the processing and your margin and so on that's applied in the UK substantially drowns out those Chinese batteries, I would imagine you can declare UK origin. And it sounds like the transformation that you're doing is substantial enough to be able to do that. So if you want to drop me a line, I'll send you through this Excel spreadsheet, which allows you to do that calculation, just to be a bit belts and braces about it.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Is that all right? Okay, no worries.
Thanks.
Karis, is it Karis next? I think.
No, it's
Oh,
Melissa.
oh, Melissa, sorry.
Hi, I was just a bit confused, sorry, about at the beginning you spoke about a 10% baseline tariff and that it wasn't stacking, so it would be a replacement tariff.
Mm-hmm.
But all the guidance online, including guidance we've received from the Department for Business and Trade, have said it's on top of existing tariffs, i.e. it's an additional tariff. So we currently pay 12% going into the US. So we were worried that obviously it was going to increase to 22%. So all the government guidance, and I have just checked online again, is that it's saying it's an additional tariff, not a replacement tariff. Because obviously if it was replacement, it would be better for us because it would drop down.
I had actually read the opposite, but I do recognise that they keep referring it to a baseline tariff. So I'll take it away and just be belts and braces and double check it for you and come back. It'd be great if it was replacement rather than stacking.
Yeah, it's just obviously with us paying 12% already, it either brings
you're already
it down
on the high.
or,
yeah, you're already on one of the highest rates. Let me double check and I'll come back. And if I have made an error, then obviously I'll correct that and make sure you all know.
Yeah, I understand it's changing all the time, so I appreciate that.
No worries, Melissa.
All
Thanks.
right, thank you.
No worries.
Jack.
Jack, you there, Jack?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the presentation. I've just got a quick question about artwork and designs that sort of originate in America. So we have just a product, we make ceramic tiles, and one of our products is designed by an American artist. So in that scenario, is the value, is that an American made product, even though it's manufactured in Italy?
No, it's where the product's manufactured that is where the origin drives.
So right, so the art, even though the fact that kind of the value, most of the value is derived from the art, the kind of creative artwork image side of it, it's still about the physical
the physical
where the product
product
is physically made rather than the kind of design elements of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much.
No worries. Thanks, Jack.
And the final two questions, Keris.
Hello.
Hello.
We manufacture leather goods in Europe and books and diaries in the UK. We have wholesale clients in the US, and those orders are fulfilled from the EU. And we obviously sell online to America as well, and those orders are fulfilled from our UK DC. Am I right in thinking that for those wholesale clients, if they're buying a leather good, it'll be the 20%, and if they're buying a book and diary that was manufactured in the UK, it will be the 10%?
Well, the EU now is just on the 10% as well. So that was just late last
for
night.
the 90 days. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So we're on the same level as the EU in that respect.
Okay, but it is, as you said before, it's linked to actually where the product
Exactly.
was
It's where the
manufactured,
product,
not where it's being exported from.
where
Okay.
it's being exported from, absolutely. So that
Okay.
so just simply moving goods from the UK into the EU to be exported to the US, if they've not been substantially transformed in the EU, they maintain their UK origin when they go into the US.
Yeah, okay. And then I just had another quick question. We sell quite a lot of we call them sales set products. So we have kind of the main finished product, but within there might be a few component parts that we would buy in on a 10-digit SKU number. They get assembled in the DC and then they're sold to the customer as a 7-digit SKU number that represents the finished product. Give you an example, a leather wine holder made in Italy, and then some metal cups that might be made in China, but they're going to be sold to a customer in the US under one SKU number. And so in that instance,
so it's almost like a kit or a pack.
Yeah, or it might be, I don't know, a cocktail box that's got, you know, a shaker and a jigger in it.
Normally, how it would work normally, where there's no trade measures in place and it's just normal trade, you would apportion a commodity code to that finished. We see it a lot with hampers and things like that, where there are various different products that go inside. Just with these extra trade measures, where customs are going to be trying to clamp down on companies getting Chinese product into the US via different routes, I'll just need to check and see how we deal with it in that scenario, whether or not you have to declare the value of those Chinese origin goods so that they can be treated differently, even though they're part of a finished product.
We are going to review our commodity codes just as a extra precaution. So
absolutely, but I can just double check and see whether, you know, we envisage anything being done slightly differently now with these new trade measures against China, and how it would deal with your products going through customs. I can take a look at that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks, Karis. And then finally, Lizzie.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Part of what we do, we sell qualifications which are delivered as hybrids. So people would study online with us with a paid course and then visit the UK for the practical sessions of that. Would that incur any duties now?
No, that's a service. So that's two different ways of selling a service. It's the service that's crossing the border in terms of you delivering that content online, and then it's the consumer crossing the border when they're coming to the UK physically for those sessions. So that's service delivery. Service is not typically subject to tariffs the way products are.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
No worries at all. I think that's it, everyone. So thank you to all of you who've stayed the course. We've taken some questions away. I'll do my best to answer those today, circulate the recording, circulate the slides. And yes, thank you very much for joining and staying the course. And we'll see you hopefully on the webinar next week if it's applicable, if not at a future one soon. But thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.